Have you ever seen a dress and fallen so in love with it that you just have to make it? I know this is probably not a common problem for the majority of the population, but as a sewer it's a daily struggle. If you've been on social media for the last year, you would have seen a big trend in poofy tulle dresses. I'm a bit late on the trend, but it's time for me to have my own tulle dress, and it's my prom dress.
Welcome to another video. I never quite know how to start these, but there we go. We'll stick to the kind of awkward vibe. This video is gonna be all about making my prom dress. As you can see, the fabric is here. It's gonna be purple, and honestly, I am so excited. I finish my A-level exams tomorrow with biology paper 3, and then I have a week in between my exams finishing and my prom. In this week, I'm going to be making my prom dress from scratch. It's going to be modelled off one of those kind of poofy tulle dresses that you see on social media. This is a design that I made of it, and let's hope that my design comes to life. I have been thinking about this idea of this dress for 6 months. That was when I first posted it on my social media, so Lila, go follow it if you want to. That's when I first posted it on my social media, and I ordered the fabric a week ago. Now, I got this idea when I saw this reel on social media. I am a dancer, and when I saw this reel, I was like, dancing in a rainy street in a poofy tulle dress, what more do I need in life? And that is where my idea came from. Now, first of all, I knew that this dress would cost a lot of money, so I had to justify making it. And that's when I came up with the idea that this could be my prom dress. I could make the dress, make it high quality, use good quality fabric, and I'd get to wear it out so it feels worthwhile making it. Here is all of my fabric. We have the tulle, the chiffon, the lining, and the twill at the end. I absolutely love the colours together, and they're just such bright, vibrant purples, and I'm so excited to wear this colour dress. I've not really worn this colour dress before, so I'm looking forward to it. This is the tulle. It's a lovely, like, bright purple tulle. It's super lightweight, and it's just honestly waiting to be gathered up. You can just tell already, it's going to be an absolute dream to gather. The skirt is going to have 2 layers of this with 1 layer of chiffon as the lining layer. The chiffon is a different bright purple. I absolutely love this because when you put the dark purple on top, you can kind of see the chiffon through, and I think it's going to create some really nice tones and highlights within the skirt so it doesn't all look one dark purple colour. It has some of this bright purple under it as well. The bodice is going to be just 1 layer of this tulle. It's going to be gathered up again, but it's going to be less see-through than the skirt. Moving on, we have the lining layer and the twill. The twill you're not actually going to see. This is purely to interline or flatline the chiffon to make it more stable to sew with. It's a nice lightweight twill, and it's cotton, so it's nice and breathable, so it's not going to be too hot. I did decide in the end to have a lining fabric. I wanted it to be patterned so that when you look inside the bodice you have this nice surprise. I have ironed this, but it's a super lightweight cotton lawn from Liberty London, and it's this gorgeous purple colour. I'm so pleased with how well it matches. Like, that bright purple is the exact colour of the chiffon, and the dark purple is the exact colour of the tulle. So I think that's going to be a really nice touch on the inside, just to make it feel more couture and put together. I thought I should actually show you the pattern for the top. This is the Rose Cafe bustier pattern. It's made from several pattern pieces from back to the centre front. I've cut out 2 lots of the bra cups. This is for the chiffon and the net and the twill. This is for the foam, because for the foam you don't need the middle seam allowance because you just zigzag them straight together. So this is my pattern piece for the bustier top. Here are some extra bits that I also got. I got this foam for the bra cups. We have the underwires also for the bra. We have the zip to go down the back. I think it was about 16 inches maybe. I am probably completely like making that up. It was about 40 centimetres, like 40-50 centimetres long zip. It's an invisible zip. We have this lovely black velvet ribbon. This is what the straps are going to be made from, and then I'm going to be wearing black shoes to tie it all in. I have this cotton twill tape. I'm using a kind of Victorian sewing method, which is adding in waist tape to keep like some rigidity around the waist and also give the garment a bit of strength. Here we have a mess of like boning and underwire casing. I got quite a thin rig line boning from the fabric shop. So that is all of the fabric and pattern pieces. We will now get on to actually making this dress.
I started out by cutting the foam layer of the bra cups. The foam was really hard to pin as it was quite thick, but after stabbing it with a pin for quite some time I managed to get the pattern piece pinned down. It was really satisfying to cut out, and I had to cut out 2 pieces of each pattern. There was 3 pattern pieces in total, which meant I ended up with 6 parts by the end of all of my cutting out. I pinned these together and bundled them up so I remembered which was which, and then I was done. I then put the pattern pieces down on the twill lining layer. I ordered just enough of the fabric so it's a little bit of a jigsaw putting it all together. I actually ended up with some spare fabric, which I'm quite impressed about. I had to add 2 inches of the bottom of all of my pattern pieces to lengthen it. This is because when I tried the pattern on, my waist was lower than the waist of the pattern. This was definitely the right decision to do. I think I probably could have got away without doing it, but I'm super pleased I did it. There's something really satisfying about pulling the tailor's chalk across the fabric. Also cutting, I just love the sound of proper fabric scissors cutting into a really thick fabric like a twill. The bodice has 7 parts and you cut 2 of each, which was 14 parts total. This lining fabric is probably my favourite fabric that I have ever worked with. I absolutely love the quality of this really finely woven cotton, and it's just stunning to work with. The chiffon is rough cut because it's more slippery, so I don't want to cut it out close to the pattern and then it slip and be the wrong shape. But to prevent the slipping, what I do is I do rough cut it like this, then I baste it down onto the twill layer. I choose a white thread that's really easy to see and will be really easy to pull out, and I basically baste the layer of chiffon onto the layer of twill. Basting is basically where you put a few quite big stitches into the chiffon and the twill to hold the 2 layers together. It takes quite a long time, but I find basting really satisfying to do, and it is definitely worth it for a better looking garment. Once the layers are basted together, I go around and I cut the chiffon slightly closer to the twill, not quite the same size yet. Then all of my pattern pieces are done. I ended up with 42 bits total. I then changed the thread on my machine to a darker thread. I needed a black thread because I started off by sewing the bra cups together. I actually love changing thread on my sewing machine. I find it so satisfying, and with the little threader that my machine has, it's just so much easier on my eyes. To make the bra cups, you lay the 2 edges of the fabric close together. You do not overlap them. This creates a really smooth, curved surface. You sew it together with a zigzag stitch so that the foam still has a bit of stretch in it, and then you have your perfectly rounded bra cups. Before inserting them, I press them just to make sure that everything is flat. Then you get on to sewing the lining. When making a garment like this, I always sew the lining first. This means that if there is something wrong with the fit, I can try it out in the lining and alter the lining before I alter the fashion fabric that lies on top. However, I did end up changing the cup size in this garment halfway through and didn't think to change the lining. So my lining actually ended up being baggy where the bra cups were, but it was just something that I had to deal with. There was a lot of pressing in this garment. I wanted to make sure the garment looked really high end, so pressing was a vital part of it. To make sure that the lining lay nice, smooth and flat, I had to snip all the seams and press it a lot. My tailor's ham became so useful during this because it's curved, which just makes the bra cup so much easier to iron. I then went on to sew the rest of the lining together. This really didn't take that long, and I actually found it really useful sewing the lining together first because then I kind of had a gauge of how long it would take me to sew the rest of the garment together. With the lining, I just really couldn't be bothered to pin it together because the fabric was very stable and it didn't really slip. Get ready for a lot of pressing footage in this video. I watched Bernadette Banner's video about the importance of pressing before making this garment, and then I think I just became a little bit obsessed with it. I just love pressing the seams properly, and also my new favourite trick is using my tailor's ham to cool the seams down. Because the tailor's ham has sawdust in, this sucks the moisture out and actually means that you end up with really crisply pressed seams. I pinned the lining of the bra cups down first. When pinning the lining of the bra cups into the bra cup, because it was a concave and convex curve, I started in the middle and worked my way out. I absolutely hate pinning curves together like this, and there was a lot of pins in the end. I just find it really difficult, and especially this fabric didn't have much give to it, so I really had to ease everything together. I'm really surprised that I didn't break any needles when sewing this, because there was a lot of needles at weird angles very closely sewn together. Somehow the only time I broke a needle was doing a straight stitch, and I don't even know how I did it. I then repeated all of the pinning and the sewing again with my basted or stay stitched layers together. I did use pins for these layers because the chiffon is still slippy.
So far I have sewn the cups together out of the foam. I have also completely sewn together the lining and I've pressed every seam. I am so pleased with how this lawn fabric has pressed because the seams are just so crisp. And then I have just started sewing it together, the seams of the chiffon layer interlined with twill. You can see all of my stay stitching is still on it. My next thing is going to be to press all of the seams because currently on the inside it's a bit of a mess, and then sew the boning on. I need to sew together the cups for these layers. I'm slightly scared to do that because the fabric was slippery on a straight line, so let alone on a curve. But I am really pleased with the progress I'm making. It's going quicker than I actually thought, so let's keep going.
Some more pressing footage. Seriously get used to this because I think I probably pressed more than I sewed in this garment. These seams took a lot longer to press because the fabric was thicker and a bit more temperamental. The chiffon is polyester instead of cotton, so it doesn't really like to be pressed as much. So I had to have the iron on a lower heat, which meant that it took way more time. Then it was time to get the basting stitches out. I love doing this because it feels really chaotic and like I shouldn't be doing it, and it's just really fun to pull all of this thread out. I then went around all of the outside seams with some really fine basting stitches in a purple thread that wouldn't be seen. This is because the chiffon still had a chance to slip, and I just really was dedicated to this garment looking high-end and high quality. There was a lot of hand sewing, but I really love it, and it definitely does make the garment look more high quality in the end. Once I did this, I went round and trimmed off any of the excess chiffon. Now the bodice outside layer was completely done, bar for the bra cups. Then it was time to tackle the dreaded bra cups. I don't know why they scared me so much, but they really did, and I put them off for ages. I think it was because I was very aware that they'd be a focal point of the garment, and I was also aware that the curved seams, the chiffon was more likely to pull and move out of place. But I did it, and the cups end up looking really good. I did the same thing that I've done with every other layer, pinned, sewed, snipped the seams, and pressed down. The only difference that I had with the bra cups on the outside was I had to pin them to the foam layer. It took me ages to figure out whether I pinned the foam layer to the lining or to the outside of the bra cups, but in the end I decided the outside of the bra cups made way more sense. This is because I wanted to top stitch the outer layer to the bra cups. There was a lot of lining up the horizontal seams on the outside and the foam layer to make sure that everything lined up. Once I sewed this, I went back and did the vertical seam, and then I had a fully top stitched bra cup. The top stitching was mildly terrifying because I was very aware that it had to look good and it had to be even on both sides. It was actually okay by the time I did the second bra cup because I figured out how to line it up on my sewing machine so it would be equal on both sides. It was just really difficult to sew because I was sewing a curved shape and trying to make it flat.
I've just done my first try on. It's currently inside out, and the seam allowance of my cups is just pinned over. But oh my gosh, I'm so pleased. I just pinned the straps on. The strap's gonna be this velvet, but I'm kind of loving this kind of like two-strap look. I think I'm gonna go for that. My next thing is I need to sew the boning in. Before I sew the boning on, the waist tape needs to go on. So I just need to kind of figure out where roughly this waist tape is going to go. I think that it's probably going to go just above my hip. So I'm thinking probably about there for my waist tape.
Where I marked the waist tape when I was trying the garment on, I went around and made sure that it was marked the same distance all the way around. Now on to the biggest predicament of probably the entire garment. How do I do the boning channels? I really wanted the boning channels to go on the outer lining layer and then the tulle to go on top. So you could see the boning from the outside, but the tulle layer would still be covering it. Now, my issue is that the covering on the boning was way too light of a purple, and I really didn't like it. After trialing many different coverings, I settled on the same as the outer layer, which is twill covered in chiffon. I just made loads of little boning channels and then snipped the seam allowance really thin. This seam allowance would be hidden behind the boning so you wouldn't be able to see it from the outside. This was probably the thing that took longest to work out how to do and sort in the entire garment. It was really fiddly to press these down so you couldn't see the seams from the outside. The twill was too thick for me to sew it inside out and then turn it the right way, so I just had to sew it with the seams on the outside. There was a lot of trimming, stray bits of thread away, but I'm really glad that I did put all of the effort into this because the garment ended up looking really good. Now I had to pin all of the boning channels onto the garment. This actually made it easier because I pinned the channels on without the boning inserted. I did try and do it with the boning inserted, but it just ended up warping the entire garment. As you can tell, there was a lot of pins again. You can never have too many pins when working with chiffon. I made sure that all of the channels were sewn down and it only pulled the chiffon a little bit in a few places, but honestly, it was hidden. I then had to remove all the boning from the casing and insert it into the boning channels. I am so pleased with my next step was making the gathered tulle layer for the final outside layer of the bodice. I debated just hand sewing it on, but it just did not sit right, so I improvised and came up with this method of basically pinning the pleats onto the ironing board. I then covered the tulle with a layer of chiffon, sprayed it wet and pressed it down. This was such a good idea and it meant that I ended up with this beautifully pressed pleated chiffon that was really easy to sew onto the garment. The hardest place to sew the chiffon on was definitely the bra cups. I took my sewing downstairs in the evening and sat in front of the sofa and just did lots and lots of tiny hand stitches to make sure that the tulle was safely attached onto the bra cup. I then got a massive 1 meter long bit of tulle and did the entire pleating process again. This would be wrapped around the entire bodice apart from the bra cups. To make sure that the pleats didn't move, I did more basting with my curved needle. This curved needle was a lifesaver because it just meant that the stitches were so easy to put in. This bit was honestly the most boring part of the entire process. Here I am just tacking down the edges where the cups will go to make sure that the pleats don't pull out of place on the curve. As you can see to the right, I have sewn down the centre front seam on the tulle onto the bodice to make sure it's attached. I did this at the centre front and 2 side seams where I hadn't yet inserted any boning. It was really quite difficult to pin these down so that I could sew it over the top. I had to wedge the pins almost under where the boning channels would be and then sew over it with my machine. It was really difficult to get it through my machine because there was already boning inserted in some of the seams and this made the garment really stiff. Once I had done this to the centre front and side seams, I pinned down the boning channel so that I could insert the boning in these seams and make sure that every single seam in the garment now has boning. I was so paranoid that doing this would pull the pleats out of place, so I used probably too many pins. You can see here how slowly I'm going sewing down this boning channel. This is because I just didn't want to pull the garment out, turn it around and see that the machine had pulled the pleats out of place. It is actually a miracle that the machine didn't pull any of the pleats out of place, and I'm really glad that it didn't, because then I would have had to unpick very small tiny stitching. I then went to inserting the bra cups. These were really hard to pin in and even harder to sew. I knew they would be really hard, but I had to get them right as they were a focal point of the garment. I had to go really slowly with my machine, especially when I was sewing the underwire casing on. Once the underwire casing was sewn on, I inserted the underwire in the casing. I was so surprised how this completely changed the shape of the garment. It gave the bodice a lot of structure and rigidity. Then the bodice was done and it was time to move on to the skirt. I was most confident about the skirt. It was the fastest bit as it was really similar to what I do every single day with my business. I folded the purple chiffon in half and then folded it into a triangle like this. Then, using some maths and an online calculator, I worked out the radius and the circumference for the waist. I take my waist measurement, added about 10 centimeters, which was the circumference, put it into the online calculator, and that gave me a radius of about 8 inches. I then cut this and then I moved on to the hem. This bit, I don't have to be that specific. I make circle skirts that often that I can kind of just eyeball it, but I did measure it just to make sure. I then sewed the two halves of the skirt together using the French seam method. With French seaming, you sew the wrong sides of the skirt together instead of the right sides as normal. You then trim the excess and fold the skirt back on itself so that raw edges are enclosed in the middle. You then sew very close to the edge, and it means that all of your raw edges are concealed within the seam. This is a really couture, high-end way of finishing seams on sheer fabric so that you can't see any of the raw edges. I then ran a gathering stitch around the top of the skirt and gathered it all up. I left a gap at the back of the skirt which I will later come and insert the zip into. I had to reinforce this bit a bit with a second bit of chiffon as the zip will take a lot of weight. I then did the exact same process again with the tulle. The only difference was instead of one layer, the tulle is 2 layers, meaning the total layers of skirt is 3. The radius for this one was a little bit bigger as I wanted to gather the tulle up slightly more than the chiffon. I then did the same thing that I did with the hem of the chiffon. I measured from the waist down to the length that I wanted and cut the tulle. I cut the tulle layer a little bit longer than the chiffon because I wanted it to hang slightly below it. Once this was done, I repeated the process that I did with the side seams of the chiffon. I French seamed the tulle together, which was actually easier with the tulle because the tulle doesn't have a right side and a wrong side. I then trimmed it, folded it back in on itself to enclose the raw edges inside the seam. Once I had done this, I put a gathering stitch in the skirt, gathered it up, and then attached the 2 layers of tulle and the 1 layer of chiffon together. I didn't get any footage of this, but I can assure you I definitely did do it. Nearing the end of the project, I just kept forgetting to get some bits of footage.
Today is the day of my prom. My hair is currently wet because I just had a shower and I've got the morning to finish off the dress. Currently the bodice is completely done. I love it. I just need to sew the lining in and then I can attach it to the skirt. I have the skirt here as well, all gathered up, and my next thing that I need to do is attach the skirt and the bodice together, sew the lining on, put the zip in, and then I'm done.
Of course, in normal Lila style, I had the whole dress to finish in the morning before my prom. I literally was sewing up until half an hour before I left, which is just classic me. Here, what I'm doing is I am sewing the bodice and the skirt together. I pinned all around the seam and then went really slow on my machine to make sure that the waist was even. When I had done this, it felt like I was on the home stretch because I could actually see that I had a dress and it looked amazing. I didn't want to try it on until it was all finished, so I carried on going really quickly so I could try it on. Here I am attaching the lining onto the bodice. I wanted a nice soft lining because I hate itchy bodices. This lining was the best thing I ever did, and it was so soft and it just added a beautiful finishing touch to the dress. This was actually the easiest bit because I just had to sew it around the top edge. When doing this, I made sure that I had the straps also attached so I could sew them in as well. I did nearly forget to put them on. Here I'm putting the invisible zip in. I am actually so pleased with how this turned out. I sewed the invisible zip on the bodice and then on the chiffon layer of the skirt so that the tulle hid it. Then I was nearly done. The only thing I had left to do was hand sew the bottom of the lining onto the skirt. The footage here, I missed out quite a lot of little tiny bits because I was just so focused on getting it done. You can see how quickly I'm hand sewing. This is not really sped up.